and sacred. That's the month we learned that we were having a precious daughter. That's also the month my blood pressure began to be a concern. February came and went, and we were well on our way. In March, we bravely announced our pregnancy on Facebook as we had made it to the 22-week mark. We decided on a name that month. Our daughter would be named Sylvie Lynn. We also learned that month that Sylvie had some growth issues and that my older body was trying its hardest to keep our sweet baby safe for as long as possible. April brought with it a nursery and several other tests. I continued to work and prepare for Sylvie's arrival in August. In May, my blood pressure insisted on rearing its head to the point I needed rest. So I negotiated my way to desk rest. We went to our new parent classes even though we weren't new parents and we were the oldest ones there. In early June, we had the first of baby showers. And then, one fateful day, I ended up in St. Louis after a routine 31-week check. Sylvie and I were struggling. I had been in the hospital for a little over 12 hours. They feared preeclampsia was setting in upon my body. During yet another test, an x-ray, I passed out. This event compromised Sylvie's heart and health. So in the most dramatic fashion, Sylvie came into this world via emergency C-section several weeks early on June 9th, 2017. As she fought to live in the NICU at 2 pounds and 7 ounces, I was fighting for my life in the ICU. My husband, Tim, spent his time running between both of us, along with other family members. It would be 3 days before I was able to meet our daughter, and 6 before I was released. It would be another week before I was able to hold her. She would then crash as Tim attempted to hold her the next day, and then another 4 weeks before we could hold her again. During the summer of 2017, Sylvie would spend 15 and a half weeks in the NICU and would battle anything and everything, so much that we affectionately called her our red-headed warrior. She crashed and coded several times, needing manual breath each time. The fluid in her lungs from a chylothorax continued to accumulate with uncertainty as to when and if it would dry up, and several chest tubes were placed. She fought through staph infection and meningitis and neck. Eventually, through many tests, she was diagnosed with Prader-Willi syndrome, which would adversely affect her muscles so much that she would have a hard time moving, swallowing, and digesting food. She hovered in that space between life and death for weeks. Tim and I lived at the Ronald McDonald House and sat with Sylvie for hours every day. Tim would travel home once or twice a week to check on our son and our home. Eventually, after 12 weeks, I would go back to work and visit one evening a week and then on weekends. The separation was agony and so difficult for everyone. Sylvie did finally come home for 3.5 wonderful weeks. But even though she was fed through a G button in her tummy, she aspirated formula and eventually developed pneumonia. She went back into the hospital for 12 more days and then developed pulmonary hypertension, which overcame her heart. Sylvie Lynn Hall died on October 21st, 2017. Sounds like a cruel, unfair, and dark outcome, doesn't it? Sounds like an awful lot of suffering and sorrow, doesn't it? But there is so much joy and love and goodness that I purposefully didn't mention in order to teach you what I know to be true about presence in the midst of suffering. Suffering is the state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship, which can be physical, emotional, psychological, relational, or spiritual. It can manifest as pain, illness, disability, hunger, poverty, death, grief, hatred, frustration, heartbreak, guilt, humiliation, anxiety, loneliness, and self-pity, and the list goes on and on. These manifestations of suffering are revealed right before us through a lifetime of moments. We witnessed a lifetime of suffering in a few short months in the NICU. Babies, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, clinicians, providers, nurses, staff members, and administrators were all suffering in different ways. Some extreme, some to death, some minor, but still yet suffering. So why bother to stop and talk about suffering if we are supposed to be talking about presence, right? Because everyone suffers. It is a part of this world, this life, and I believe that we cannot be fully present without knowing, seeing, feeling, hearing, and completely acknowledging suffering. Your suffering, my suffering, the suffering of others, the suffering of this world. So what about presence? Are you present in this moment? Is your mind wandering? 8 billion things to do still at work today, and then when you get home, worried about a loved one, caught up in your own suffering? Or are you listening, not just with your head, but with your heart? Presence is the state or act of existing or being present in a place or thing. What does it mean to be present? It means existing or occurring now, being in the moment, listening and understanding. So let's think about that for a moment, existing now. Not in the past, not in the future, but now. Now. Presence brings one's attention to the now, the moment right before us, not what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. When someone is present, he or she is able to embrace the current moment or situation with an open heart. Presence allows us to answer the high calling of seeing clearly in a moment, of just being, of connecting heart to heart, of meeting someone where he or she is, to be really in that moment with them, to listen without judgment, without defense, without expectation, and to offer compassion and kindness, to bear all things, to hope all things, to believe all things, to love and be loved. Staying present in the moment can be so challenging, especially if it's uncomfortable, heartbreaking, difficult, or sad. But it is possible to be present, even in the midst of suffering. Think of Jesus upon the cross. He was in the midst of his greatest suffering, and still yet said, "Father, forgive them." He was present to the end and then beyond. So let's go back to my testimony for a moment. Let's reinsert presence into the story and see where we end up. From the day we learned we were pregnant, we began to celebrate and love on Sylvie. While there was fear, presence allowed us to experience all the joy. Presence allowed us to name Sylvie and announce her arrival and to push the fear of the what-ifs aside. Presence allowed us to sit during those tests and news of concern and to still trust. Presence allowed us to create a nursery and to register for gifts and to enjoy the moments we heard her heartbeat instead of worrying. Presence allowed Tim to have the strength to drive me safely to St. Louis and sit by my side as we waited to see what would unfold. Presence allowed us to consider our family members and friends and to update as we could. Presence allowed me to trust it would be okay going into the emergency C-section. Presence allowed Tim to run between the NICU and the ICU and to be with both of us completely and wholly. Presence allowed me to be in that dark place in the ICU and to trust I would get to meet my daughter. Presence allowed us to look beyond the isolette, the IVs, and the alarm sounds and to marvel at the wonder of our miracle daughter and her red hair and how much she looked like her father and fought like her mother. Presence allowed us to entrust Sylvie's care to her providers and care team, and also allowed us to learn as much as we could about each of her conditions, and to advocate respectfully but fiercely on her behalf. Presence allowed us the courage to hold her every moment we could, and to touch her and love her through 2 small armholes during the weeks we could not, and to sit and watch as she fought and battled. Presence allowed us to not shut down, but to battle alongside Sylvie. Presence allowed us to sit with Sylvie knowing she might go at any time. Presence allowed us to be fully with Sylvie each day as we read, sang, talked, and loved with no distractions. It allowed us to cherish each precious moment and live like there was no tomorrow. Even though separation was hard on everyone when I went back to work, presence allowed us to truly focus on the moment at hand, especially when we were together. Presence allowed us to talk in the cafeteria on one of the darkest nights in the NICU when we thought Sylvie might leave us. It allowed us to talk about our fears and the what-ifs and brought us back to the now and again to trust. Presence allowed Sylvie to fight with all of her being, so much that she beat the staph, meningitis, and neck, so much that her chylothorax dried up, and she eventually came off the vent all the way down to the lowest oxygen setting, so much that she began to thrive and engage. Because Sylvie was present through her suffering, she fought to move from an isolette to a crib. Presence allowed Sylvie to move her arms and legs fiercely, even though they thought she would never be able to because of a Prader-Willi diagnosis. She became so present that she enjoyed the long, rambling talks we had, the books we read, the songs we sang, the musical crib mobile, the finger puppets, and being held for hours on end. Even on the darkest of days, she would open her eyes to show her presence. Sylvie continued to be present as she was released and introduced home. She was so present that she became very much aware of her much, much bigger brother and our routine. She was so present that one night before she became so sick, we were lying on the bed and listening to Bach or Beethoven. And as I pretended to lead the orchestra, Sylvie reached up with all her might to mimic what I was doing. Knowing how hard movement was for Sylvie, I lay there in tears as she gave the gift of her presence once again. She did this over and over, even in the midst of her own suffering. Sylvie was present until the end, even when she became so sick again. Even when she was rushed to St. Louis and admitted to the PICU and placed back on a vent, and then sedated and heavily medicated, up to the moment where presence allowed her the choice to stay or go home. Presence allowed Tim and I to see and know when Sylvie became so sick once again. Presence allowed Tim to ride in the ambulance and allowed me to pack a few things and drive to the hospital alone. Presence allowed us to once again study and learn and advocate on behalf of our miracle daughter. Presence allowed us to sing and read and comfort her as much as possible without ever holding her again. Presence allowed us to move back into the Ronald McDonald house for a few nights, trusting it would all work out. And presence allowed us to step out of the way when she crashed time after time, and then for the last time on that beautiful fall evening of October 21st. And to watch helplessly as they frantically tried to save Sylvie. And I'll never forget that room and the 30 plus people in it. And then to hear that there wasn't any coming back from this moment, this crash. We could put her on life support, which might only keep her alive with the possibility of no brain activity, or to let her go. Tim was talking to the doctor as I had gone to look out a window and pray like never before. I thought I was praying for them to save Sylvie, but after a few moments, presence helped me understand. I was praying for the strength to let her go. Being present allowed us clarity to know what was true and good and right for our daughter. Being present allowed Tim to come to me and say, let's go hold our girl. Being present allowed me to say, okay, and then allowed us to tell the care team to stop, and even give the care team grace by touching their arms and saying, it's okay, you've done all you can, it's time. And presence allowed them to listen to us and to stop trying to save Sylvie. And then being present led up to the moment of moments, that moment I talked about earlier, when everything you know and believe will be tested, when we held our daughter as she breathed her last breath. Side by side, we loved her to eternity. saying the things we wanted to say. Being present allowed us to hold her for a couple of hours after, allowed us to make promises over her body that we wouldn't let this break us, that we would honor her for all the days of our life. And being present allowed me to cut some of her hair and to sing to her one last time. And presence allowed us to leave our daughter's body with the doctor and to leave that hospital and pack our stuff at the Ronald McDonald House and to drive home and get up the next day and make calls and plan a memorial service for our miracle daughter. And presence has allowed us to move forward. We are forever changed and heartbroken and sad most days, by the death of Sylvie Lynn. But being present allows us to shower and eat and work and care for our son and to be with our family and do all the things you do when life goes on and to be kind to our healing hearts. But also to live in gratitude and focus on the memories of such joy and love and to laugh and live again and to let go of guilt and to honor Sylvie by remaining present instead of shutting down and to remember the amazing life of our Sylvie girl. Her life of 4 months and 12 days seems so very short to us, but rather Sylvie's presence was and is life-changing, beautiful, and so very lovely. We get to tell the world that we had a daughter, and not just any daughter, but a brave, strong, red-headed warrior who taught us more about love and life than anyone ever will. And for that, we will forever be grateful. And now, more than ever, being present brings us outside of our suffering and grief and allows us to see others who are hurting or suffering and to give of our compassion and love like there is no tomorrow, because there isn't. All we have is right now, whether suffering or not. No, we have not mastered the art of being present. We still have plenty of moments of shutdown and hibernation in order to survive. But we continue to learn and grow. We have learned 2 great lessons through this journey of presence that we intentionally try to practice each day. Number 1, life is too short not to be present. And number 2, love always wins. And to answer those pressing questions we talked about in the beginning, yes, I believe moments lead to big moments of faith testing. And yes, I believe that all the suffering in a life can lead to so much good. Presence helps us pause and see the big picture of good and love and light. And sometimes to simply pause and trust until we can see again. Stay present, especially in the midst of your suffering, my friends, so you don't miss a single moment of goodness. This is the face of one of the most present humans I have ever met. So remember, stay Sylvie strong. Thank you.